नमस्कार. इंटॅक्ट पुणे महाराष्ट्र वृक्ष संवर्धिनी वनराई यांच्या वतीने आजचे सन्माननीय व्याख्याते डॉक्टर दीपक आपटे सर आणि उपस्थित सर्व मान्यवर श्रोते तसेच वेगवेगळ्या संस्था संघटनांचे प्रतिनिधी सुद्धा या ठिकाणी दिसतात. तर आपणा सर्वांचं मी सर्वप्रथम स्वागत करतो. खरं तर आपल्यापैकी बरेचसे जण दरवर्षी या व्याख्यानमालेमध्ये सहभागी होतच असतात. तरी सुद्धा काही नवीन जे काही विद्यार्थी आज जॉईन झालेले आहेत त्यांच्यासाठी मला एक बॅकग्राऊंड आवर्जून सांगावंसं वाटतं. ते म्हणजे 1991 पासून दरवर्षी स्टॉकहोम इंटरनॅशनल वॉटर इन्स्टिट्यूटच्या पुढाकारातून जागतिक जलसप्ताह आयोजित केला जातो. पाण्यावरील ही एक जागतिक परिषद असते ज्यामध्ये पाण्यासंदर्भातील निरनिराळ्या समस्या आणि त्यावरील उपाययोजनांवर चर्चा करण्यासाठी जगाच्या कानाकोपऱ्यातून वेगवेगळ्या क्षेत्रातल्या व्यक्ती संघटना सहभागी होतात. आणि याच औचित्यानं आणि याच पद्धतीनं किंवा याच पार्श्वभूमीवर स्थानिक पातळीवर सुद्धा आपण जलसप्ताह कशा प्रकारे साजरा करू शकतो की ज्यातून आपल्याला जलजागृती घडवून आणता येईल या विचारातून ही व्याख्यानमाला सुरू करण्यात आलेली आहे. यंदाचं या व्याख्यानमालेचं 4थं वर्ष असून इंटॅक्ट पुणे, महाराष्ट्र वृक्ष संवर्धिनी आणि वनराई यांच्या संयुक्त सहकार्यातून ही व्याख्यानमाला दरवर्षी आयोजित केली जाते. खरं तर 24 ते 28 ऑगस्ट या दरम्यान जलसप्ताह होता, परंतु आपल्याकडे जो काही गणेशोत्सव नुकताच पार पडलाय आणि काही जलस्रोते जे आहेत आपले तर त्यांच्या सुद्धा सोयीसाठी आपण गणपतीच्या काळात संध्याकाळी हा आपला जलसप्ताह घेण्याऐवजी व्याख्यानमाला घेण्याऐवजी आपण आजचा दिवस या ठिकाणी घेतलेला आहे. आज, उद्या आणि परवा म्हणजे अर्थात 8, 9 आणि 10 सप्टेंबर रोजी ही व्याख्यानमाला आपण आयोजित करण्यात आलेली आहे. तर आयोजक ज्या संस्था आहेत तर त्यांच्याविषयी मी थोडक्यात आपणाला आवर्जून या ठिकाणी सांगावंसं वाटतं. इंटॅक्ट अर्थात इंडियन नॅशनल ट्रस्ट फॉर आर्ट अँड कल्चरल हेरिटेज त्या संस्थेची स्थापना 1984 मध्ये नवी दिल्ली येथे भारतात वारसा जागरूकता आणि संवर्धनाचं नेतृत्व करण्याच्या उद्देशाने करण्यात आली. आज इंटॅक्ट ही जगातील सर्वात मोठ्या वारसा संस्थांपैकी एक म्हणून ओळखली जाते, ज्याचे देशभरात 228हून अधिक विभाग आहेत. या संस्थेच्या माध्यमातून विविध प्रकारच्या वारशाचे जतन व संवर्धन करण्याचं कार्य चालतं, ज्यामध्ये नैसर्गिक वारसा हा एक महत्वाचा भाग आहे आणि म्हणूनच इंटॅक्ट पुणे चॅप्टर या व्याख्यानमालेची सहआयोजक संस्था म्हणून या ठिकाणी आहे. इंटॅक्ट पुणे चॅप्टर जे आहे तर त्याची स्थापना 1986 मध्ये झाली आणि त्यांनी पुण्याच्या वारशाच्या संरक्षणासाठी महत्वपूर्ण प्रकल्प सुद्धा राबवलेले आहेत. त्यापैकी महत्वाचे प्रकल्प जर सांगायचे झाले तर त्यामध्ये पुण्याची वारसा यादी आणि दस्तऐवजीकरण, शनिवार वाडा परिसराचे पुनरुज्जीवन, त्याचबरोबर निसर्ग किंवा पर्यावरणाच्या दृष्टीने जर सांगायचं झालं तर पवित्र वृक्षांचे दस्तऐवजीकरण आणि संवर्धन, तसंच पुण्याच्या नद्यांना अतिक्रमण आणि प्रदूषणापासून वाचवण्याचे प्रयत्न असे वेगवेगळे उपक्रम निसर्ग पर्यावरण वारसा जपण्याच्या दृष्टीने इंटॅक्ट पुणेच्या माध्यमातून होत असतात. आणि आज सुद्धा ह्या व्याख्यानमालेचा सुद्धा जो काही आयोजन आहे ते सुद्धा याच भूमिकेतून करण्यात आलेलं आहे. त्याचबरोबर महाराष्ट्र वृक्ष संवर्धिनी तर ही जी संस्था आहे तर ही नैसर्गिक संसाधनांच्या साक्षरतेवर लक्ष केंद्रित करून आणि पर्यावरणाच्या पुनर्संचयनासाठी गेल्या 33 वर्षांहून अधिक काळापासून काम करत आहे. 1989 मध्ये स्थापन झालेल्या या संस्थेचे संस्थापक जे आहेत प्रख्यात वनस्पती शास्त्रज्ञ डॉक्टर वामन दत्तात्रय वर्तक सर, की ज्यांना उभा महाराष्ट्र नाही तर देशामध्ये त्यांची एक वेगळी वनस्पती शास्त्रज्ञ म्हणून एक ओळख आहे. आणि यांच्यासारखे जे मान्यवर संस्थापक सदस्य होते तर यांचा एक मोठा कार्याचा समृद्ध वारसा या वृक्ष संवर्धिनी संस्थेला लाभलेला आहे. आणि या संस्थेच्या माध्यमातून सुद्धा क्षमता वृद्धी असेल, जनजागृती आहे, ज्ञानाचा प्रचार प्रसार करणं, कौशल्य विकास करणं अशा वेगवेगळे कार्यक्रम पर्यावरणाच्या निसर्गाच्या संवर्धनाच्या दृष्टिकोनातून आयोजित केले जातात. आणि आज याच भूमिकेतून महाराष्ट्र वृक्ष संवर्धिनी ही संस्था सुद्धा या व्याख्यानमालेच्या आयोजनाची जबाबदारी या संस्थेनं या ठिकाणी घेतलेली आहे. त्याचबरोबर वनराई संस्था ही तिसरी सहआयोजक संस्था या व्याख्यानमालेमध्ये सहभागी आहे. पद्मविभूषण डॉक्टर मोहन धारिया यांनी स्थापन केलेली वनराई गेले 4 दशकांपासून पर्यावरण संवर्धन आणि शाश्वत ग्रामीण विकासाच्या क्षेत्रात देश पातळीवर योगदान देत आहे. त्यामध्ये प्रामुख्याने वनीकरण, मृदा जल संवर्धन, परिसंस्था पुनरुज्जीवन, शाश्वत शेती, ग्रामीण उपजीविका अशा विविध क्षेत्रांमध्ये वनराई कार्यरत आहे. आणि यामध्ये विशेषतः दुष्काळी जे गावं आहेत त्यांच्या वाड्या वस्त्यांपासून दुर्गम आदिवासी पाड्यांपर्यंत वनराईचा कार्यविस्तार पोहोचला आहे. पर्यावरण शिक्षणामध्ये सुद्धा वनराईचं उपक्रम वेगवेगळे राबवले जातात आणि प्रत्यक्ष जमिनीवर किंबहुना तळागाळात लोकसहभागातून नॅचरल रिसोर्स मॅनेजमेंटचे कार्यक्रम राबवण्याबरोबरच वनराईच्या कार्याला पूरक जनजागृती घडवून आणण्यासाठी वनराईचा विशेष भर असतो आणि याच अनुषंगाने वनराई संस्था सुद्धा आजच्या या व्याख्यानमालेच्या कार्यक्रमामध्ये सहआयोजक संस्था म्हणून सहभागी आहे. आणि आज आपण या वर्षीचे जी थीम घेतलेली आहे, दरवर्षी आपण वेगवेगळी थीम घेऊन व्याख्यानमाला साजरी करतो. मागे आपण पाणी टंचाई, दुष्काळ, पाणलोट व्यवस्थापन असे विषय घेतले होते. यावर्षी आपण त्याच्या मागच्या वर्षी आपण नदीच्या संवर्धनाचा विषय घेतला होता आणि यावर्षी आपण वेटलँड कन्झर्वेशन म्हणजेच पाणथळ जागांचं संवर्धन हा विषय घेतलेला आहे. आणि आपल्या सर्वांना कल्पना आहेच की पाणथळ जागा ह्या किंवा पाणथळ क्षेत्र किती महत्वाचे आहेत. आणि ह्या दृष्टीने खरं मी काय फार बोलणार नाही. आज आपल्याकडे तज्ज्ञ मान्यवर या ठिकाणी आपल्याला अधिक मार्गदर्शन करतील. त्यामुळे आपले आजचे मान्यवर वक्ते जे आहेत डॉक्टर दीपक आपटे सर, हे आपल्याला सेंट्रल एशियन फ्लायवेज आणि वेटलँड्स या विषयावर आपल्याला मार्गदर्शन करणार आहेत. तर त्यांचा परिचय करून देण्यासाठी आणि विषयाच्या दृष्टीनं पुढे सुरुवात करण्यासाठी मी पुढील सूत्र सॉरी सुप्रिया मॅडम यांना सुपूर्द करतो.
धन्यवाद वाडेकर सर. कार्यक्रमाची सुरुवात करताना सगळ्या श्रोत्यांना अशी विनंती आहे की आजचा विषय जो आहे पाणथळ जागा म्हणजे जमीन आणि पाणी यांचा समन्वय साधणाऱ्या अशा ज्या जागा आहेत त्यांच्याशी तुमचं काही नातं असेल तर चॅटबॉक्समध्ये आपलं नाव, त्यासोबत कुठून लॉग इन करताय आणि अशी एखादी पाणथळ जागा जी तुमच्या आवडीची आहे किंवा ज्याचा तुम्ही अभ्यास करत आहात, कारण काही अभ्यासक पर्यावरणाचे विद्यार्थी पण जॉईन झालेले आहेत आपल्या ह्याच्यात, तर असं आपण चॅटबॉक्समध्ये जरूर एंटर करूया. त्यानिमित्ताने एकमेकांची ओळख पण होईल आणि या सगळ्या पाणथळ जागांना आपण आपल्या या आजच्या कार्यक्रमात सामील करून घेऊया. त्यामुळे आपलं नाव, कुठून जॉईन करत आहात आणि आपल्याला आवडीची किंवा ज्याचा आपण अभ्यास करत आहात अशी एखादी पाणथळ जागा, एखादा नदीचा काठ असेल, तळ्याचा काठ असेल, एखादा ओढा असेल, जी काय तुमची आठवणीतली महत्वाची पाणथळ जागा आहे ती जरूर आपण चॅटबॉक्समध्ये लिहूया. आजचे वक्ते डॉक्टर दीपक आपटे यांची ओळख करून देताना मला आनंद होत आहे. दीपक आपटे यांनी प्राणीशास्त्रात डॉक्टरेट पदवी घेतली आहे. सागरी पर्यावरण शास्त्रात त्यांची विशेषता आहे. त्यांनी मुंबई विद्यापीठातून प्राणीशास्त्र क्षेत्रात पदव्युत्तर पदवी, बँकॉकमधील AIT मधून एकात्मिक किनारी क्षेत्र व्यवस्थापन आणि अमेरिकेतील ड्यूक विद्यापीठातून सागरी धोरण पदवी प्राप्त केली आहे. डॉक्टर दीपक सध्या DES पुणे विद्यापीठात प्राध्यापक आणि संचालक म्हणून कार्यरत आहेत. ते सृष्टी फाउंडेशन SCF चे संस्थापक सदस्य आणि संचालक आहेत आणि जैवविविधता या क्षेत्रात G20 तयारीच्या कामासाठी MOEFCC साठी एशियन डेव्हलपमेंट बँकेने त्यांना सल्लागार म्हणून नियुक्त केले आहे. त्याआधी त्यांनी बॉम्बे नॅचरल हिस्ट्री सोसायटीमध्ये 28 वर्षांचा कार्यकाळ पूर्ण केलाय, ज्याचे ते 8 वर्ष संचालक आणि मुख्य कार्यकारी अधिकारी होते. त्यांची वन्यजीव विषयातील कारकीर्द 3.5 दशकाहून अधिक काळ आहे आणि शाश्वत विकासासाठी राष्ट्रीय आणि आंतरराष्ट्रीय स्तरावर अनेक धोरणे विकसित करण्यात त्यांनी मोठे योगदान दिले आहे. एक प्रमुख शास्त्रज्ञ म्हणून त्यांनी 50हून अधिक मोठे प्रकल्प, 1000हून अधिक प्रशिक्षण कार्यक्रम राबवले आहेत आणि 100हून अधिक लोकप्रिय लेख आणि संपादकीय आणि 35 तांत्रिक अहवाल लिहिले आहेत. लक्षद्वीप द्वीपसमूहात त्यांच्या कामामुळे अलीकडेच वन्यजीव संरक्षण कायदा 1972 अंतर्गत एकूण 675 चौरस किलोमीटर प्रवाळ रीफ क्षेत्रात 3 सामुदायिक अभयारण्ये स्थापन करण्यात येत आहेत. डॉक्टर दीपक यांनी विज्ञानात नवीन असलेल्या 7 प्रजातींचा शोध लावला आहे, तर जैवविविधता संवर्धनातील त्यांच्या योगदानासाठी त्यांच्या नावाने 4 प्रजातींचे नामकरण केले आहे. लक्षद्वीप बेटांमधील कोरल रीफ्स आणि जायंट क्लॅम्प्सवरील त्यांच्या कामासाठी त्यांना प्रतिष्ठित ग्रीन ऑस्कर, विटले पुरस्कार आणि 3 विटली कंटिन्युएशन पुरस्कार मिळाले आहेत. त्यांना अमेरिकेतील ड्यूक विद्यापीठाने सागरी संवर्धनात जागतिक फेलोशिप देखील दिली आहे. दीपक हे लीड इंडिया आणि इंटरनॅशनल व्हिजिटर्स प्रोग्राम USA चे फेलो आहेत. त्यांना पर्यावरण संवर्धनासाठी वसुंधरा ग्रीन टीचर पुरस्कार आणि तारू लालवाणी रोटरी पुरस्कार तसेच पर्यावरण शिक्षणाच्या क्षेत्रात ठाणे रोटरी क्लब पुरस्कार मिळाला आहे. डॉक्टर दीपक एक प्रसिद्ध लेखक असून त्यांनी किनारी आणि सागरी जैवविविधतेच्या क्षेत्रात 7 पुस्तके आणि प्रतिष्ठित जर्नल्समध्ये 90 वैज्ञानिक शोधनिबंध लिहिले आहेत. ते सध्या भारत सरकारच्या प्रमुख समित्यांचे सदस्य आहेत, जसे की MOEFCCचे भारत सरकारच्या CRZ आणि राष्ट्रीय महामार्ग ग्रीनफील्ड अलाइनमेंट्सवरील तज्ज्ञ समितीचे अध्यक्ष, MOEFCC भारत सरकारच्या इम्पॅक्ट असेसमेंट धोरणाच्या तज्ज्ञ सल्लागार समितीचे सदस्य, डॉक्टर दीपक मुंबई विद्यापीठातील सागरी अभ्यासातील मास्टर्स प्रोग्रामच्या अभ्यासक्रम समितीचे संयोजक आहेत. तसेच ब्लू फ्लॅग बीच सर्टिफिकेशनचे ज्युरी सदस्य आणि नवी मुंबई भारत सरकारच्या पाणथळ जागांना झालेल्या नुकसान मूल्यांकन समितीचे सदस्य आहेत. ते एक कुशल पाण्याखालील छायाचित्रकार आहेत, ज्यांना 5,000 तासाहून अधिक डायव्हिंगचा अनुभव आहे. त्यांना भारतातील विविध राज्यांमध्ये आणि लँडस्केप्स आणि सीस्केप्समध्ये काम करण्याचा 3 दशकाहून अधिक काळाचा अनुभव आहे. असे व्याख्याते आज आपल्याला लाभले आहेत. त्यामुळे अजून वेळ न घेता मी पुढची सूत्र डॉक्टर दीपक यांच्याकडे देते आणि त्यांचा मध्य आशियाई उड्डाणमार्ग आणि पाणथळ प्रदेश किंवा सेंट्रल एशियन फ्लायवेज अँड वेटलँड्स या विषयावरील त्यांनी व्याख्यान सुरू करावे अशी विनंती करते. डॉक्टर दीपक आपटे.
थँक्यू. एवढं अस्खलित मराठीतलं माझ्या मते इंट्रोडक्शन पहिल्यांदाच 35 वर्षात कोणीतरी केलेलं आहे.
धन्यवाद.
थँक्यू व्हेरी मच. I just share the screen. I will take probably more question answer than monologue. So okay, sorry, unfortunately full screen yatna hot nahi hai because I'm just on a portal Zoom, not actual program. So apologies for that, but I hope this is visible.
हो सर, व्यवस्थित दिसतंय. इट्स विजिबल.
Okay. मला ती मराठी आणि इंग्लिश अशी विनंती केली होती करायला, पण आता यांचं मॅडमचं मराठी ऐकल्यानंतर मला नाही वाटत मी काय फार मराठीत बोलू शकेन. तसा थोडा एक वेगळा विषय आहे वेटलँड्स आणि बर्ड मायग्रेशन. पाणथळी जागांवरती आपण केवळ एक सोशो इकॉनॉमिक ऍस्पेक्टनी आतापर्यंत मुख्यत्वे करत बघत आलेलो आहे की त्याच्यामध्ये लोकांना तिथे आजूबाजूला राहणाऱ्या त्याचे फायदे कसे असू शकतात. पण ते करताना आपण एक महत्वाचा जो नेचरचा जो ऍस्पेक्ट आहे तो विसरून जातो की आपल्या इथे लक्षावधी पक्षी मायग्रेट करतात दरवर्षी आर्टिक रशियापासून ते थ्रू सेंट्रल एशियन फ्लाय, ज्याच्याबद्दल मी आज बोलणार आहे. आणि ह्या पक्ष्यांकरता या पाणथळी जागा ह्या तेवढ्याच महत्वाच्या आहेत. आता पाणथळी जागामध्ये 2 प्रकार आहेत. आपण त्याला एक फ्रेशवॉटर वेटलँड जे म्हणतो ते, आणि एक कोस्टल वेटलँड जे आहे की त्यामध्ये ब्रॅकिश वॉटर आणि फोरशोर एरियाज त्याच्यामध्ये इन्क्लूड असतात. बट बिफोर आय गो टू बर्ड मायग्रेशन और वेटलँड्स, I would like to show 3-4 slides just to give you a context of why we need to look at linkages of not just wetlands and birds, but in general ecosystem as such in a conservation point of view. It's a very different perspective. Not many people agree to this perspective, but I principally believe that having worked in this sector for almost 40 years, I principally believe that nature is much more resilient than what we think of it. And in that context, I think this 4 slides sets a tone for today's presentation. It's a beautiful planet. There's no doubt about that. We haven't yet found another planet, which hosts life in our solar system, and it's remarkably beautiful. I mean, those who had an opportunity to go to, whether in forest or on the shore or underwater, you will see it's extremely pretty and beautiful. But at the same time, it's extremely violent planet. And all these events that you see currently happening with this predictable rains, or the cyclones, the volcanoes, the tsunamis, the storms, etc., they are really the drivers for whatever diversity today we see on this planet Earth. In fact, formation of planet Earth in itself has happened through an extremely violent event. So, violent, nature of planet is not new to nature per se. Nature has evolved through extremely violent processes, and it's also changing planet. it's not a stagnant ecosystem. So all the time we keep saying that, oh, my coral reefs are going to die in 100 years or maybe 200 years or 500 years. Well, obviously they will die because they transit into some other ecosystem. Coral reefs were not there 10,000 years ago. They probably will not be there 10,000 years later. So it's a transiting ecosystem. And that's the basis of principal basis of ecosystems, that ecosystems are not stagnant. They keep on adapting, they keep on changing. Now, for example, this left-hand side image you see Acropora complex. It was one of the most dominant coral, for example, in Lakshadweep, where I worked for almost 30 years. Over a course of time, because of the natural processes plus El Nino and bleaching related events that has happened in last 4 or 5 decades, they are slowly transiting into more hard coral dominated, like what you see here, Poraitus. They are now more dominant corals than Acropora. And there's also a lot of dominance of soft corals because soft corals are not vulnerable to sea surface temperature. So nature itself, like we adapt to changing climate, every generation, has passed through the phase of adaptation to the changing climate as a human society. Nature also adapts itself to the changing climate, and it's always a changing planet. It's like that. It's going to be like that. It's also extremely crowded planet. We have got more than 10 billion population, plus we have got enormous amount of biodiversity. And if you take, the total count of number of species, number of individual species, then it's an extremely crowded planet. And yet, and it's remarkably, I would say, a transiting a planet. It's also connected planet. You look at marine mammals, for example, they travel through the, oceans thousands and thousands of miles each year from their breeding areas to foraging areas, etc., etc. So are the sea turtles. Now, for example, leatherback, they are known to travel to almost 20,000 kilometers. Uh, like people, we also travel extensively across continents. So there is no ecosystem today is isolated in itself. It's a connected planet, a connected ecosystem. And if you look at the cargo, this all transfer happens of all kinds of stuff through sea, through air, etc., etc. And so are the birds. If you see this right-hand image, there are millions and millions of birds travel north, south every year from breeding areas to foraging areas, etc., etc. So it's a very well connected planet. Now, when you have this kind of, but at the same time, extremely vulnerable planet, any small changes, and the classic example is sea surface temperature. A small change in sea surface temperature from 28 degrees to 29 degrees centigrade leads to this massive coral bleaching, uh, globally. So are the different kinds of species. I mean, some of them, uh, always are in low numbers, but yet their populations continue to decline, barring some of the excellent case studies where humans are able to save some of the species from virtual annihilation. Like you see here, whale shark, program in India, for example, is a classic example. But yet, the sharks and the rays, they're all slaughtered in millions and millions, bringing their population down to the level of extremely rare endangered species. So, though it is very violent, it's very robust, it's very dynamic, it is yet extremely vulnerable to planet. And I think this context is very important in whenever we debate about conservation. Most of the time, debates on conservation is quite lopsided. That human impacts on nature are irreversible. They are going to destroy the planet. I think planet existed before human being, and it will exist beyond human being too. The question is how much of human induced impact that we will have on the planet. I think that is something we not majorly talk about. It's most of the time I have seen all these forums which I have pleasure of attending is pretty much lopsided views of and therefore the actions derived out of these views are also not necessarily in a great interest of conservation. Now, for example, the whole tree plantation, if it's taken out of context, then tree plantation itself can be very, very dangerous for many habitats and ecosystems. Now, for example, there is a whole concept of, in India especially, greening the desert. I think desert have naturally evolved due to climatic changes hundreds and thousands of years ago. Now, making a human-made intervention to make it green doesn't make any sense because we have not yet understood the dynamics of why, in the first place, forests become desert. Naturally itself, because of this oscillating, nature of, Earth, that every 20,000 years it's assumed that there is a change in ecosystems. That's what one of the paper which I was reading, very interesting piece of work. Uh, and same is the case for grassland, for example, has been, a lot of plantation has been done. And that is the principal reason for many of the grassland related species have become, critically endangered. So these interventions without understanding the whole dynamic nature of the planet Earth is something which one need to, uh, look at very, very carefully. So there are three, principal impact, especially when it comes to the migratory birds or the migratory species, for example, per se, in coastal areas, for example. Now, in coast, for example, erosion and accretion and loss of artisanal livelihoods, all these different habitats is one of the area of impact of whatever development we do. And wetlands have to be looked into the footprint of humans on the wetland, because without understanding that, we'll not be able to save either the wetlands or the migratory birds. Then open ocean, there are different kinds of impact. We'll not go into this in today's presentation because it's principally on the coastal wetlands, not really on open ocean. And then species level impact. Now, if you look at wetlands, very generic point of view, it varies, in forms across landscapes. And then there are again natural wetlands and man-made wetlands. I'm sure this is a pretty basic that all of us will understand. Then there are, intermittent transiting ecosystems like, swamps and estuaries and marshes, which are within this transiting areas between terrestrial and the coastal wetlands. If you look at the wetland extent in India, the effort started sometime around 1970s to determine the extent of wetlands through various surveys pan India. And it has been assessed that in 1989 assessment, there are about 58.3 million hectares, of the wetlands, out of which almost 40.9 million hectares were under paddy. So these wetlands are a vital source of economy in that sense, considering India being an agrarian ecosystem. I think wetlands has got an absolutely, valuable role, both in terms of economy as well as in terms of regulating the climate. Then in 2018 assessment, if you look at it, we have reduced from 58.3 million hectare to 15.86 million hectare. It's a vast degradation of wetlands has happened over a course of 3 to 4 decades. Unfortunately, wetlands in many places considered as a wetland, like grasslands are considered as a wetland, so are the wetlands in many places, except of course for the large man-made wetlands or large lakes and rivers. Smaller wetlands, and I will give you one of the example, in my presentation in Central Asian Flyway context, even how small 2-3 hectare wetland can be one of the most critical bottleneck habitat for some of the most important migratory birds. Well, anyway, this whole traction to understand wetlands has started coming in around same time 2018, when Supreme Court has said that all the wetlands above 2.5 hectare has to be identified and notified. And that process still is ongoing in many parts of the country where they have been documented. Subsequently, of course, there are number of uh, changes and amendments that coastal wetlands, for example, are not considered as classic wetlands, inland wetlands, like inland wetlands, because they are covered under a very different instrument called Coastal Regulation Zone. Wetlands which are under protected areas are now considered as a part of Wildlife Protection Act, etc., etc. So there are different ways to look at management perspective of the wetland, because managing 86 million hectare and under wetland is practically impossible for any government for that matter. So we need to really understand the whole complex part of this wetland management. Ramsar Convention, which again identifies this most important wetland, But it's not a protection regime. Ramsar Convention is more of wise use of wetlands. So it allows the use of wetland, but one should have a proper management prescription for the wetland so that both people and the nature and wildlife should benefit out of it. And then there are different types of habitats which are covered under the Ramsar Convention as a part of wetland recognition. If you look at the Ramsar site, the international network of sites that can support maintenance of global biodiversity, we have a large number of wetlands as Ramsar sites. What we do about that's a different story. But we have at a global level about 75 sites spanning 1.32 million hectare of the wetland regimes in India. This does not mean that they are all protected. There will be certain wetlands which will be part of the protected area network. But if you look at the important bird areas directive prepared by BirdLife International, it gives a very good picture of how many wetlands actually have a protected status. The same is the case for our coastal wetlands. Now, for example, mudflats and mangrove ecosystem, it's basically deltic coastal and island, what we call it as. We have across our coastal state a very good, presence of coastal wetlands. Now, for example, it's almost 4 million hectares of coastal wetland exist, out of which Gujarat has got the highest network of coastal wetland as well as coastal mudflat. And migratory bird point of view, therefore, some states become absolutely important in conservation context. Of course, there are other states which also have got inland wetlands, which are equally important for migratory birds point of view. But these are principally, distributed into seven states. So Gujarat has got the highest, while as Karnataka has got one of the least amount of coastal mudflats and mangrove ecosystem. And then we have got intertidal mudflats, which again are equally important because intertidal mudflats, which go की भरती ओटीच्या मधला जो आपण मडफ्लॅटचा एरिया जो असतो त्याला आपण टायडल फ्लॅट्स जे म्हणतो ते those are also important for shore birds, migratory birds, for foraging. And I'll come to that part slightly later, how this provides a great challenge into some very unknown, undiscrete, areas, considering, specific to the migratory birds point of view. And then we look at, again, it's a very interesting part where currently my organization is working on, is that if you look at, there's something called as a mudflat without vegetation, what we call it as a non-vegetated mudflat, and then mudflat with vegetation. Mudflat with vegetation essentially are the areas covered with mangroves, and then secondary vegetation associated with mangroves. I'm talking purely about the coastal part of it, not terrestrial part of it. And migratory birds point of view, I think, therefore, this mudflat without vegetation, so non-vegetated mudflat, what we call, become very, very important. And they are relatively very less in number. And then we have got a coastal lagoon. I mean, we have got some of the most brilliant coastal lagoon so far as migratory birds are concerned. For example, this image here is a Chilka Lake, where you'll see millions of migratory ducks, visit annually. So on East Coast, for example, we have got Chilka, we have got Pulikat, Pennar, Bendi, which Pennar, Bendi are little, known lagoons. Most popular, of course, are Chilka, Pulikat, then Nizampet, Mutupet, and Gulf of Mannar. While as on West Coast, most of the lagoon are, in southern part of it, we have Vembanad, Ashtimudi, and Paravur, so mostly Karnataka further south, Valley, etc., etc. We don't have much of the lagoons, Goa north. And then we have got lagoons of Lakshadweep, which are very, very different compared to all the lagoons that I have been talking about. Lakshadweep lagoons are more atoll formation. They're pure saline. There is no freshwater input into the lagoons of Lakshadweep, except, of course, for the monsoon runoff. Now, given this set of extreme diversity within the ecosystems, coastal ecosystems, wetland ecosystem, I think bird migration becomes then one of the principal areas which we can use as a very good advocacy tool for conservation standpoint. Because most of the time wetland services are defined only in economic context. They are rarely been defined into ecological context. And I think bird migration provides an excellent avenue to speak about wetland, to speak about conservation of wetlands, because birds truly are the global ambassadors. They travel from through different countries. They don't require passport. They just fly. And there are some remarkable stories about bird migration. It's one of the most fascinating subject uh, if you want to dwell on this over time. Now, there are three types of migration, what we call it as a hop migration. So there will be a lot of stopovers that we'll see one place, where they again land on good areas for foraging, then they go to the next area, etc., etc., and they keep on moving back and forth. Then there's a skip migration, what we call. So they take long transit, gaps, not like the hop migration. And then the jump migration, they go from one place directly to the other place. And there are different species that we can talk about these three different types of migration. Uh, then there are single species to different direction. Now, for example, lot of birds in Ukraine area will go to different countries as a part of it. So the different population, subpopulation that we talk about arriving out of one place. And I will give some good examples from India for those interested, understanding a little bit about the Central Asian flyway migration. Now, if you look at migratory flyways, there are total 9 flyways, global flyways, that those are illustrated here. For our point of view, for India, there are 3 flyways, which are part of it. The Central Asian flyway, which you will see this whole area, is one of the most important flyway that covers India. Then we have got East Asian Australasian flyway. So part of it will go into Northeast and Andaman Nicobar Island. And then there is this West Asian African flyway. The Amur Falcon, for example, is a classic example, which starts actually from China and go all the way up to Africa through this flyway, flying over Mumbai. Uh, there are great studies done by Wildlife Institute of India by satellite tracking of Amur Falcon. So there are 3 flyways which covers, but essentially the Central Asian flyway which covers the whole of India. And in Central Asian flyway, most of the birds which breed in Arctic Russia in this region, they will travel during the winter times in India when it's extremely cold in this part. They will fly all the way into various parts of the coastal areas in India as a part of Central Asian flyway. And then again, they go back to the breeding area into the Russia. Now, BNHS, where I have the pleasure of working for almost 28 years, has been the pioneering institution of studies of migratory birds in India. And BNHS, over course of its 140 years history, have ringed more than million birds. We have a huge amount of data on migratory birds. Previously, it was only the rings that we used to put on the legs of the birds, but now the satellite telemetry has completely changed the context of understanding the migration in a very different way, more robust way. So we now know the stopover sites and the challenges with stopover sites, etc., etc. If you look at Central Asian flyway, this is basically the boundary of the Central Asian flyway. And there are other overlapping migrating routes of different species of water birds, as I said earlier. It covers almost 279 population of 182 migratory water bird species, including 29 globally threatened species. So CAF is one of the important flyway in that context. And Government of India has taken a lead for conservation of Central Asian flyway. There is going to be a secretariat of CAF in ministry as well as Wildlife Institute of India, which will work over a course of time on dealing and it's the secretariat means we will be liaising with multiple countries where these birds move from its breeding ground to the foraging areas. And therefore all those young students who are present today, I think this, and if you have love and passion for bird migration, I think this will be a great area to invest your time and energy and understanding for it, because there are good amount of research, upcoming research, as well as conservation avenues in Central Asian flyway. And if you look at the shortest, it is the shortest flyway, but very rich in avian diversity. And these are some statistical figures, that you can probably look at. about 307 migratory species, 340 million square kilometer of flyway area, 30 countries. Then there are about IBA triggered by migrants about 1,178. IBAs are basically important bird areas. It's an atlas of important bird areas prepared by BirdLife International and BNHS. And for the CAF point of view, there are about 1,000 plus sites are triggered, IBAs are triggered by the migratory birds. Now, if you look at this, this is where I think role of individuals become important in conservation. Out of all these 1,000 plus sites, there are only about 293 sites are fully protected. Now that leaves large number of wetlands which are not protected. That's what the current status of wetlands. Therefore, it left to the governance. If somebody is very keen in governance to protect the wetlands, then attention is there. If it is not, then it is not. So we have to be vigilant about our wetlands because large number of wetlands are not protected. And if you look at the sites with over 1 million birds, there are 5 sites currently. I mean, there's still large number of sites, five, with more than 1 million birds that visit annually into the flyway. If you look at completely restricted to the flyway, there are some of the species which are completely restricted to the flyway, like bar-headed goose or Indian skimmer, or brown-headed gull, or sociable lapwing, or your white-bellied heron. Uh, but you also have something called as largely restricted to CAF. These are predominantly, what we see here, spoonbill sandpipers or, your curlews and godwits, etc., as well as the black-neck crane that we will see in Ladakh. And then we have breeding ranges of birds restricted to CAF. So for example, Siberian crane, is a critically endangered species. We used to have a small population in Bharatpur. Unfortunately, that population has gone extinct. We have lost this bird in India, but there's still population, which exists in China and that part of it. Then the spoonbill sandpiper one, again very critically endangered species. A very small population breeds in Arctic Russia, moves mostly into the China and Thailand and into that flyway. There's not much sightings of these birds in India per se. And then there are large number of vulnerable, near threatened, and least concern species as a part of the breeding ranges of the birds into the flyway. There is a wonderful, atlas prepared by uh, government of India. It's a national action plan for Central Asian flyway. This is mostly data from the BNHS, IBA is part of it. And if you look at IBA specific to wetlands, then there is a very detailed information available into this atlas. Now, of these, there are certain community reserves, some of them are conservation reserves, some of them are national park, then only reserve forest or tiger reserve wildlife sanctuaries. So, if you want to go into understanding of the protected status of the wetlands, then you should refer to this document, which will give you a very interesting information on the way that can help us look at wetlands in a conservation context. Satellite tracking, of course, has changed the whole dynamics of understanding the migratory birds. Satellite tracking, for example, BNHS did satellite tracking studies about 15 years ago on bar-headed goose. Mostly tagged in Chilka. Point Calimar in Tamil Nadu, and some of them are in Chilka. And see how far and whatever stopover sites, different wetlands this bird used, eventually flying over Himalayas, going all the way up to different places of breeding areas. So there are different populations that we are talking about. Now, this information becomes very important. The conventional, the bird ringing was primarily using the rings. So unless you recapture that bird, there was no information available about which areas they take. They rest, they forage, then they go ahead. With satellite tracking, you get very precise information. Now this become very invaluable tool now because we know that okay, these are tiny dots you see here. That's where this bird landed for resting or foraging. Then these tiny wetlands, because it's a wetland bird, is obviously land in the water body. Then these tiny bits of places becomes a great value in terms of conservation for this specific bird. And there are large number of species now been satellite tagged, so we are getting some wonderful information This lesser flamingo was tagged again when I was director in BNHS in Mumbai. And this is how it traveled through coastal areas all the way up to Bhavnagar. This is a slightly old map. It has went further all the way up to the run of Kutch, where a lesser flamingo breed. But it then provides a very interesting, routes to look at conservation point of view. Now, if it's going to move through the coastal area, for example, the population which we have in Mumbai, then coastal regulation zone becomes very, very important instrument for us to talk about conservation of this particular species. But in terms of the previous slide that I have shown bar-headed goose, it also goes through inland wetlands. So both coastal wetland, inland wetland, therefore become very important for us to look at the context of it. And why this, the whole issue of mudflat and non-vegetated mudflat and vegetated mudflat I was talking about, because it's one of the densely, populated place flamingo point of view, lesser flamingo point of view is Mumbai. Uh, you must visit sometime around February, January, February, March to see the number of flamingos. We usually get about 200,000 flamingos annually. Uh, Most of the population will move before the rains to its breeding areas, but the juveniles and some of adult population stay back. What is so unique about Mumbai? And I think this is where the again very important context of understanding the dynamics of habitat become very, very important. There is no shortage of mudflats in India, as I showed in the previous slide. There are a large number of non-vegeted mudflats available across east and west coast of India. But why is this particular place, which is one of the most populated place, one of the uh, area which is under huge infrastructure development, area which is extremely polluted, yet 200,000 flamingos and about 500,000 migratory birds find refuge in this small dot speckle you can see here. Uh, they forage on the mudflats. What is so unique about that mudflats? I think that is where science becomes paramount. We cannot do advocacy based on, shallow understanding of the subject. Now here these mudflats are, I mean, they are not really huge mudflats. A very small 60 square kilometer round mudflats exist in this region. Uh, those are non-vegetated mudflats I'm talking about without mangroves. But these mudflats are extremely rich in food. Why they are rich in food? Because a lot of untreated sewage getting into the water plus warm water from the refineries like Tata Power, like BARC, like BPCL, etc., etc. So warm water, lot of nitrogen and phosphorus gives an excellent source of productivity, primary productivity, and that's what on these flamingos feed. So they are not here because these mudflats are great. These are some of the most worst and horrible mudflats. They are here for the food. So where should our advocacy, start? We cannot just simply say that uh, you should protect those mudflats. I think protection is a double-edged sword. Sometimes by by putting them in a protected area regime, we actually do more harm in context of conservation. Now here, what we require is not the mangrove conservation, but the mudflat restoration and cleaning of those mudflat by the heavy load of pollution that is coming through. Because by allowing these birds to come here every year, and by not doing the real role that is required of controlling the pollution, we are actually risking the health of these birds over a course of generation. And therefore, the advocacy for flamingos in this area should not be opposing this bridge or that bridge, or don't do this or that, because this bird lives in a human-dominated landscape. It's adapted to human being. All these bridges, which there was so much opposition to it, there is no change in the flamingo numbers since these bridges has come. But if we do not clean these mudflats of the pollutants, we will allow to compromise the health of the population over course of generation, which is more dangerous, than all other areas. Also, if you have to look at then what is the priority of it? The priority is look at mudflats in two aspects. That no mangroves invade into those mudflats, because mudflats with mangroves, flamingos will not be able to feed. It has the bill is very soft. It's a filter feeding. It require a very soft, loamy mudflat. So we cannot allow regeneration of mangroves on the mudflat if our principal objective is conservation of flamingos. If you are interested in saving mangroves, then let mangroves come into those mudflats. Flamingos will leave over a course of time because they will have no foraging area. So we have to have a clear objective driven management of ecosystem, which unfortunately doesn't happen in this country. In this particular place, for example, mangroves been included as reserve forest. Good or bad, that's a different issue we can debate separately. But and then the sanctuary was declared subsequently for flamingos. That does not allow. And cutting mangroves today considered as a great crime, and I don't understand why. If its objective is to protect, conserve flamingos, then you cannot have mangroves on the mudflats. As plain as simple. We are not saying that you cut down all the mangroves. Therefore, we are saying that all those mudflats you don't allow mangroves to regenerate. Fresh regeneration has to be regulated and controlled if you want to save this beautiful majestic birds and such a large congregation of that bird. So that's the narrative that we usually miss in a debate of conservation. I think it is very uh, I don't know whether it's a right choice of words or not, but opposing every project is a fashion statement today. Not necessarily every project will cause irreversible damage to the nature. I think we should have a robust science behind that, and I think there is where role of young generation is to go deeper into the science of it before we start talking about conservation, because most of the time half cooked science is more dangerous than no science. That's my personal take on it. People may agree or may disagree. And if you look at, for example, godwits, again this one bird we ringed while I was there. So it traveled through directly up to beyond Uzbekistan, and then it has number of stopovers going all the way up to Russia, and it came through a very different route via Kazakhstan, and back to the Mumbai. But these birds have got a very strong sight fidelity. This is almost like, I think, the fourth year of these birds. So it's going the same route, maybe small deviation here and there, because as wetlands are lost across its flyway, they will find other, wetlands in and around areas. But it's pretty much the same route it will follow, going to the north in one route, coming south from another route. And then we have got, Bartil Godwit. This is a classic example. I think this bird, satellite type bird, it flew 11,500 kilometers non-stop, 9 days from Alaska to New Zealand without taking a break. This is one of the most, treacherous journey we have ever understood of a migratory bird. Now, what kind of, evolution of these birds are that? What kind of energy, what kind of, use of weather, use of wind to fly, how they will navigate in a featureless ocean. I think it's a remarkable phenomena that I don't think we are still able to understand that fully. With satellite tracking, at least we are now getting a very strong data. Now, for example, there's one bird, so these sites where it landed, therefore it become very important area to look at Yellow Sea part of it. Now, therefore, role of countries like China, who is become very, very important, because this is another important flyway, where large number of migratory birds are moving through. If you look at demoiselle crane, now this is more of kind of a terrestrial, you will see in coastal areas, of course, but you will see also in agriculture fields. There, some of the birds were tagged in Thol and Nal Sarovar. And look at its migratory route, starting from Gujarat, going all the way through Pakistan to Afghanistan, then going to Turkmenistan, to Uzbekistan, then going all the way up to further into Siberia and coming back in different routes. Therefore, if you want to save migratory birds, you cannot just talk about the sites here. We need to talk about all these sites which are used by these birds on this migration routes. And therefore, the Central Asian Flyway, that's how the flyway concept has evolved, that you engage all the stakeholder countries and the organization in its flyway, so that a unified action for conservation can be taken through very cohesive efforts. And I think that therefore, the Central Asian Flyway was one of the most neglected flyway. In 2019, Government of India hosted a CMS in Gandhinagar, Gujarat. I think that's the first time that Government of India has shown leadership, that government will host the Secretariat for Central Asian Flyway. So all of us have got a great responsibility to be part of implementation of National Action Plan. It's available on Ministry website for free download. You can download. It's a very fascinating information. I was part of core team which prepared that particular action plan. And this is what I mean that, for example, these are the areas where you will see most of the time this flamingos foraging. This is a Shivri, that whole BARC area, excellent quality mud flats, then little bit of in Uran and this part of Raigad. But right in the heart of midst of it, the developmental pressures in Mumbai are, enormous. And this is where Navi Mumbai International Airport is coming. And therefore, for this airport, then it becomes very important to understand migratory bird context, because this is a landing area, this is a takeoff area, and then you have got these dense flocks of birds flying. You see this image downside left. These all pink dots. These are flamingos. They are resting there during the high tide time. Because these coastal wetlands are very unique, it has high tide and low tide twice a day. The movement of birds, is twice a day, and every day the tide time change by 45 minutes. So every day the movement of flocks will change by 45 minutes, and therefore the management of bird hazard risk becomes a very critical aspect, which nobody had thought of that point of time uh, when this whole project has come up. That we need to look at the cyclic, movement pattern of these migratory birds, because they are tidal, feeding, foraging birds. Uh, Therefore, we require much more modern tools to monitor flocks, for bird hazard mitigation. So this kind of information will provide very sound scientific basis for the management of risk for the airports. Whether to have airport or not, that's something is a different issue. Government will have its own thinking, logical process of selecting sites, because airport require large sites, and areas like Mumbai may not have that kind of a space available. So maybe that's a choice of airport. There may not be many choices to have airports in Mumbai. The existing airport is already congested, and therefore I think for policy process, uh, hand-holding of governments to make them understand the risks of uh, aviation risk, what we call it as hard risk, is therefore very important. And it should be based on very strong science, not just because something think, oh, this may cause, collision here, this may cause collision here. So we require a large amount of satellite tracking of birds into this area, so that we know their movement pattern. These are all coastal areas where they will go, and the high tide roosting areas are very, very few in this area. So these blue tags you will see, these are the high tide roosting areas where they go during the high tide, because it's the water will be up to the brim, so they will not be able to forage during that time. So they go to these places to rest. So if you look at high tide roosting sites, are very few. There are not many. While as foraging areas are plenty, they will go all these areas for foraging on the mudflat during low tide. But all of these, 200,000 flamingos and 500,000 migratory birds, we utilize these tiny pockets of wetlands as a high tide route. These are all wetlands. They don't roost on land. They roost on wetlands. So therefore, the conservation point of view, we have to be very careful that some of these sites will have to be protected, irrespective of how much of pressure these areas will have for development. Because without this, sites, there will be a lot more erratic movement of birds into this area, making more increasing risk of aviation hazard in many fold because of this erratic movement. Rather than having them secured high tide roosting sites, there is a pretty much set pattern. So you only have to monitor flocks. Yet accident will still happen. Last year there was a collision for, I think, flamingos collided with, I don't know which airline in Mumbai. Uh, Thankfully, good or bad, it's a perspective. Uh, I think about 25 flamingos died because of collision, but flight could land safely, saving 400 souls on the flight. So somebody will say, oh, but 400, 40 birds are gone. Well, that's individual context of the way we look at the challenges. And therefore, coastal regulation zone notification has to be understood if you are very keen to look at the coastal wetland. Inland wetland, as I said, there are different instruments for protection, but coastal wetlands are covered only and only under coastal regulation zone. And therefore, using coastal regulation zone as a tool for, doing advocacy for saving some of these non-vegetated mudflats become important. Like grassland, for example, like desert, the greening of mudflats is also one of the priority agenda for government. There's nothing wrong in doing mangrove plantation, but if the plantations are done on the bottleneck areas for migratory birds, then down the line, another 100 years, 50 years, 100 years, all those critical habitat foraging areas of migratory birds will be lost permanently. And therefore, we have to choose the conservation advocacy in a way that we are able to make some difference in policy making process. Otherwise, just saying no to everything doesn't take us anywhere. And government eventually, won't take us very seriously because we have somehow habit of saying no to everything. That's a perception. Right or wrong, it's everybody's take on that. So if you look at, for example, this National Action Plan for Migratory Birds, I think it's a great document for young researchers to go through, understand different prescriptions. And if you look at, there are different, components within that. It includes species conservation, habitat conservation, capacity, communication, research monitoring, international cooperation, etc., etc. And it also gives a list of absolutely bottleneck sites to start conservation with. And if you look at it right from different states, Tamil Nadu, for example, has got large number of significant wetlands, and then there are important clusters of wetlands together because the wetlands at times are small. Then we have got Andhra Pradesh, Odisha, Maharashtra. We have got Jayakwadi, Gangapur Dam, basically freshwater wetlands. Nandur Madmeshwar, again freshwater wetland. Then Mahul Shivri mudflats, the coastal wetland. Alibag, part of Alibag, the sandy shores again become very important. Thane Creek and Uran. So this document, therefore, this becomes then a direction for us that okay, we can focus at least on these sites to begin with. We cannot focus on a million wetlands, but we can focus on priority site. Now, this is very specific to Central Asian Flyway. Of course, there are other areas for wetland conservation point of view, and that's a different story. But this is very specific narrative for the Central Asian Flyway. And I think the end of it, one should does not fill all sizes, and therefore every conservation action has to be site specific to certain extent, where we can make difference individually or collectively as a community. I think that's a small presentation. I'll be happy. I'll stop sharing this. We'll go for more interactive question answer part of it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That was a very good overview of what wetlands are and their importance and what needs to be done about them. So if you have any questions, you can
I'll be very
either
happy.
raise your hand and ask or type it in the chat box, please. कोणाला प्रश्न असतील तर झूम मधून हँड रेज करून विचारू शकता किंवा चॅट बॉक्स मध्ये टाइप करा आपला प्रश्न. तर तोपर्यंत माझा एक प्रश्न आहे, बाकीचे विचारतायत तोपर्यंत. How about the local community who are directly dependent on these wetlands for their livelihoods? How do they look at it with the changing scenario, and especially in terms of conservation?
Actually, wetlands are principally, source for livelihood for communities which stays around wetlands. So they essentially become the primary stakeholders. We will not be able to save wetlands without taking, communities staying around the wetlands. So I think sensitization of communities therefore become very, very important. It's not that they do not understand. They of course know birds for generations. They have seen the birds in their backyards. I think what is missing is nobody probably would have understood that these birds go all the way to Russia for breeding. That knowledge was lacking. So if we can actually put this narrative, which is very different, and I tell you why this narrative, whale shark is a classic case, for example. They used to be hunted in huge number in Gujarat. They used to be slaughtered in thousands in Gujarat at given point of time. But then there was a campaign started by state government, ministry, coast guard, local NGOs. Uh, uh, yeah, and they actually engaged Murari Bapu, who is one of the very respected, revered, uh, from that part. And he made a very simple emotional appeal to the people, fisher people, that when a daughter come to, जब मुलगी घरी येते बाळंतपणा करता, तेव्हा आपण तिला आईला कसं ट्रीट करतो. Do we harm her, or do we take every possible care of the mother and the child? So these whale sharks are coming to our coast to give birth. You cannot kill them. I think that one appeal by one person made the change the tide for conservation of the species. Today, that community became protector of that species. Any whale shark come into the nets of these fishermen, they voluntarily cut their nets and release the shark. I think it's a great example where a change understanding or a emotional pitch to the people for conservation has worked, and it has worked for many species all over the world. It's not that we are unique in that sense. I think that pitch has to be right. If we can convey to these people that the birds which come my backyard, go all the way up to Russia for breeding and again come here, and they keep coming, and they have a long lifespan. We have some of the records spanning to almost 25, 30 years, after the first stringing which has been done. I think you should read the Bird Migration Atlas, which was printed, which was written by Balchandran Ranjit Mankadan, published by BNHS when I was there. I think it has got remarkable stories of migration. I think that is by and large lacking. What we today talk about is only the negative part of the conservation. Of course, the wetlands are in very bad shape. It's not that it's going to change the whole context in a day or two. But when you start presenting in a different narrative to the people, I think I principally believe that if communities can be engaged constructively, conservation context will be very different in India. Uh, we we cannot do conservation minus people, in this country with 1.3 billion people. There is no question of doing conservation into a very colonial acts like Wildlife Protection Act. They may be useful in those times, 1970s, 80s, uh, where you know you have to remove people from the forest, etc., etc. I principally don't agree to that viewpoint. Uh, I know we are a community where we are living with tigers for generations. But despite knowing the fact that tigers kill, almost 1,000 people across India every year, yet we have not become as a society that hostile to the tigers even today. So I think that's the strength of people, and we should build conservation on that strength. I mean, I understand, these animals require large landscape, but that time is gone. We don't have those landscapes, and I don't think we can create those landscape anymore with this kind of population. So what best we can do is to see how we can do management of this existing landscape. Let's not allow them to go down further, but by making people and partner in conservation. I don't think any of these species in the long term will survive, if locals are alienated from the whole debate of conservation. Most of the conservation debates are ivory tower debates. I know that I have seen it very closely. And we have to take these debates and these actions at grassroots level. And therefore, all these who are listening today, those who work at grassroots level, every single grassroots worker is, I would say, a conservation warrior. He or she can make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. There are also some very good words for your presentation in the chat box. I'll just read out the questions that have come up. Could you please repeat the name of this atlas at BNHS? People are getting very interested about the atlas.
It's called Bird Migration Atlas. It's available in BNHS. If you can go website, and if you want to buy, you can buy it through website. I hope it's there. I don't know. I left BNHS 4 years ago. I don't know what's happening out there now. Uh, but I think it's a great work. It's a great work by Dr. Balchandran, who probably one of the most respected scientists in bird migration globally. And so is Ranjit Mankadan. Uh, both of them have retired long ago. And there's another author, Tuhina Kutti, who's from Pune only. Brilliant scientist on migratory birds. I think you must read this. There's great information available in that atlas. Just as knowledge you read, forget about conservation and everything. Just look at how far they can go, when it was tagged, when it was recovered. Look at the time gaps of that. Fabulous.
Another question, how groundwater exploitation affects the wetlands?
It does affect. I mean, any extraction, unregulated extraction will impact not just terrestrial wetland but also coastal wetlands. Therefore, I mean, it will bring out salts on surface. So, groundwater extraction unregulated has made agricultural lands in many places completely non-productive because the whole salt over time will kill the productivity of soil. Uh, so there are, I mean, we have regulations of all kinds in this country. It's not that there are no regulations. The question is the monitoring of those regulations become very challenging uh, given the very limited human resource that's available with the enforcement agencies. And I think therefore we all are part of government only, unless we share equally the burden of conservation. Government on itself will not be able to do much if you don't support conservation. But conservation has context has to be right. So groundwater, is there are regulations. For example, in CRZ areas, groundwater extraction is not permissible, but yet we do illegally in many places. So if we become irresponsible, then all those rules and regulations means nothing. So I think some ownership of these resource has to be there. And it's not that communities always are all naive. There are also different perspective on that, but without them conservation is not possible. So is your wetland conservation is not possible without people.
Thank you, sir. There's another question around the flamingos clashing on airlines. What can be a solution for that?
I think very active monitoring of movement of flocks, and now there are radars which actually can monitor the movement of flocks. In early advance warning to the pilots is the only way. There is no way pilot can save aircraft if 10,000 birds flew right in front of the aircraft. So active management of, I mean, we can't do, we have no control on how birds will move, but we have a control on how flight will move. So if there is a huge movement of flock, the wise way is to then we'll see, it's the right time to land, or you just go around, wait, because birds are not going to just fly in the sky forever. They will just move from one place to other place. So it's a matter of, few minutes, few, hours when they are kind of going around. So you can do management well, but if we have a proper understanding of the subject, and that's what Navin bhai, we have been telling them that you will require, because every 45 minutes the tide will change, low tide will change, high tide will change every day. So every time your bird movement will change by 45 minutes. So it's not that you have just one radar and monitor and then that will happen. This monitoring is every day and night, to make sure that when landing happens there are no flocks around. So there are ways, there are mitigation measures. It's never 100%. The mitigation measures will never be 100%. Accidents will still happen. But we can still, with good science, very robust science, if we can do good satellite tracking of these birds, for example, here, large number, few birds will not help. It will give us a very good idea of how these birds are moving from foraging areas to roosting areas, to which roosting areas, which foraging areas, etc., etc. So over time, it will help us definitely in a huge way avoiding, these accidents.
Sir, I'll read out the next question. How do the Wetlands Conservation and Management Rules 2017 address the issue of unregulated urban expansion and encroachment? And what has been the reality of their implementation based on your scientific observations of wetlands?
Well, that's why I've said there are a number of rules and regulation. I would have listed you, probably I would require 8-10 slides just to list down the rules and regulations and the act and, we have. That's a sad reality that we have some of the rules. But the implementation and monitoring is, is very poor. Uh, and that's largely because, you know, government has got limited resource, human resource. I mean, today we have a technology. 20 years ago, we didn't had a satellite technology. Today, we can monitor through satellite technology whether my wetlands are shrinking or they're expanding, etc., etc. So we have to have a modern technology use in terms of looking at the implementation of it. And again, there are, implementation also can be done through active citizens group. I know in Mumbai there are some very good citizen groups which keep, pressure on government to make sure that some of those high tide roosting sites are not compromised. And this is purely citizen-led movement that you see in Mumbai. So citizens can play a role because government will not be able to go to every corner. It is probably is not priority also at times for government conservation point of view. Wetlands, of course, are slightly different because it's water, and it's said that future wars will be fought on water, and we have seen one case very recent conflict. So water is going to be the driver for most of the conservation advocacy in times to come. And it is all the more important considering that with IPCC climate prediction, which unfortunately are coming true, that precipitation is much more unpredictable today than how it was 20 years ago. So with this unpredictable precipitation, today you have suddenly huge amount of water coming in. And wetlands are the only way, if you have a good wetland, healthy wetland around you, it will cushion the impact of flooding, usually. So regulatory role of wetlands also is very, very important. But again, as I said, these discussions are ivory tower discussion. We don't reach to the communities who stay around the wetlands. And their question is simple. आप हमें बताओ हमें क्या करना है? मी काय करू याच्याकरता? As an individual level, what can I do? You talk about all this climate regulation, you talk about flooding, you can talk about migratory birds, you talk about different conventions, which the person probably doesn't know anything about it. So that's a legit question, and we don't have clear answer for that. की आपल्याला काय करायचं त्या वेटलँड करता? मी काय करू इंडिव्हिज्युअली? माझ्याकरता येतो प्रश्न आहे. माझ्या गावाच्या बाहेर एक सुरेख वेटलँड आहे. मी इंडिव्हिज्युअली त्याच्याकरता काय करू? Today I am in this space, so you know, talk to few people here, there, you can do a lot of things. But as a community who is not privy to this knowledge, who is not privy to this information, who may not even have time to read this because their day-to-day struggle will be, two times meal for the family. And we have large section of that society who doesn't bother about conservation. The struggles are different. And that's a real life. And they are the real victims of degradation of the environment. So how can we then talk to these people of conservation when they have no means to have two times meal? But yet they may have a will to do something about it because they draw water for drinking for their house and domestic use. So they are primary, stakeholders in my personal view. I think, we are way behind time, in this critical dimension of advocacy. I mean, there are groups working, but we have not reached to that level where we are able to sit down with, the primary stakeholder. We all do meetings in, five-star hotels and resorts and travel internationally, talk a lot about it, but on ground. So these rules are there, but monitoring mechanism for those rules is not adequate. Citizens will have to be active and not necessarily activist, I would say. We have to be active and we should make a very, concerted effort. I would say one person taking a battle for one wetland for all his life, will probably, is what is required in times to come. Courts are there, but again, courts order, who's going to implement? It's a government machinery which is going to implement. So I think more than focusing on courts, more than focusing on, I mean, those are important instruments. Those will be required in certain cases. But that's not the solution for all the cases. I think we as a citizen have a great responsibility to, at times help the government, at times, make your view clear to the government that no, this has to be safe.
Thank you, sir, for highlighting the social aspect of these issues and also reminding us that as citizens, as individuals, we also can do our bit. So, considering the time, I think we could take one more question and then
Sure.
maybe.
May I ask a question, ma'am? I mean,
Yes, sir, please do.
there's nothing. Yeah. So thank you for the nice talk that you gave. You said that pollution, warm waters, are responsible for
Uh,
increase in flamingo
untreated
sewage.
sewage.
Yeah,
Untreated sewage.
untreated
Yeah.
sewage. Do we have data on that, or we are just speculating?
No. We
I
have
mean,
adequate. We
yeah,
have
I'm-
adequate data, sir.
I am asking it in light of the fact that some of our students can take on projects related to
Absolutely,
that.
sir.
Yeah, that's why I'm
Absolutely.
asking you that. Uh,
Yeah, I think there is adequate data,
Mhm.
and I don't know whether these reports are available in a public domain. But when I was there in BNHS, we took the project from MMRDA to actually, establish this fact. And there are five. I think it's a sixth, seventh year or eighth year of this project.
Mhm.
Those reports will be available, I'm sure. If you
Because I would like to also ask you a supplementary question onto that.
sure.
Because I see here Mr. Patankar over here, Uday Patankar also. We
Okay.
were both in state groundwater departments,
Okay.
right? And we know how the airport came through, right? And so the fact remains that there was an environmental impact assessment done by IIT Mumbai, and that sat on the table of Jairam Ramesh for long in the Ministry of Environment, and he had raised two red flags. One is about the groundwater. That is why Patankar Sahab is asking you that question. Number one, I'll give you the background of that, and number two is basically about the flamingos themselves, because this survey was done, as you probably also will be
BNHS
knowing
was
about part of that,
monitoring.
exactly, because I've seen that report.
Yeah.
So if you see that the number of roosting sites, or even the number of population of the flamingos coming then in 2006 was very less. So
Yeah.
we have this timeline sort of saying that, okay, now if it involves civil aviation and disaster, in that case, bird hit and other things, can we do a reassessment of this? I mean,
Well,
just
sir,
revisiting will help. And I think so many students are over here.
I think this simply requires a regular monitoring. This is not a phenomena, that you can just count this year and forget about it. We have this information for last almost 30 years.
Exactly.
Probably what happened, I will tell you the background of that, because since I was, conservation officer in BNHS when this whole thing,
Exactly.
I was very young that time, of course. That little bit of enlightenment came slightly later. As
Yes,
young
sir.
researcher, you never see this whole,
Big scenario.
complex,
Yeah, exactly.
big scenario. So what happened earlier was, it was first time, recorded by Sauri Rajan, who was that time employed in MBPT, that there are about 5,000 flamingos, and it was a great news that time that 5,000 flamingos in Mumbai. But what happened that time, these bird watchers groups were not very active 25 years ago into this landscape. So we never surveyed in detail all the wetlands that we have. 30 years ago, there were a lot of wetlands in Uran and all those areas.
Yes, exactly.
But we focused only on selected areas. So our population estimate 30 years ago, 5,000, may not be very accurate. It may be only in Shivri. Had we looked at all the other areas, our population that time also would have been probably 50,000. What has happened? There are two reasons why this change is happening. First thing, of course, we started since last almost 8 years. Uh, what we call it as multiple locations we are covering same time. So there is no overlap or missing gaps in terms of a data. And since we have been doing this for almost last 10 years, the data is pretty much robust. That it's about 200,000, slightly less, between 150 to 200,000 flamingos will come annually. The numbers will vary, of course, based on breeding season, etc., etc., etc. Rains in Gujarat, etc., etc. And secondly, I think why we are now seeing them in small areas because of the coastal squeeze, what we call it as. A lot of wetlands are being lost in Uran and Navi Mumbai, in those areas. So they are getting, all these birds are getting squeezed into smaller and smaller area. And I think this is very important aspect that bird hazard has to be looked into this context. The flock sizes are increasing because they are getting, squeezed into
Concentrated
smaller,
areas. Yeah,
smaller
the
areas.
smaller area.
So the narrative, that time we only talk about 5,000. Suddenly from 5,000 it became 150,000. Definitely there is an increase. Whether it's from 5,000 to 150,000 is a different story. It may be from 50,000 to 150,000. And this is not just a scenario here. I think all areas where they go, there is a coastal squeeze. And if you see, lesser flamingo is a very interesting species. You'll find them in all human-dominated landscapes.
Dominated landscapes.
Naroda, you see, there is again a thermal power plant, warm
Exactly.
water discharge, untreated sewage,
Correct.
large food available. Jamnagar, refinery, warm
Exactly.
water,
Exactly.
mud flat, Mumbai. So if you see the high density distribution of flamingos is all across human dominated landscape where there is a warm water discharge and there is untreated sewage getting into the water course. I think it will be, sir, a great topic for your students to go and systematically study this nutrient part of these areas and how this, because that will give undeniable evidence
Yeah, and if you're saying
on
that
that.
the water temperatures are there, then we can definitely see it in infrared or
Yeah,
some
because warm
imageries.
water
Yeah,
is get discharged into the sea, no? So if you
exactly,
go to
exactly.
Tata
There's a
Power and
sink.
if you
Exactly, it's a sink.
survey into the mangrove areas, you can feel the, if you stand in that
Warmth. Yeah,
area,
exactly.
you can see the temperature difference.
Exactly.
So I think it's a great subject. And that's why I've said that, if you can bring this science, in not just one location, do it in Naroda, do it in Jamnagar, Gujarat part, do it in Mumbai, do it in other parts, Point Calimar, where there are no, impact, but yet there are no this kind of influence, but lesser flamingos are there. So what, drivers are there for human induced influence on these flamingos on in one part and then the other part? I think that will be a great study, sir.
And can we see Dharamtar Creek as one of the alternative sites?
Dharamtar, we may not have this large number,
Mhm.
but if you
No,
want to,
but if we can produce an area, maybe artificially, for them not to come to Panvel. I'm just saying it in term paradigm of the
see,
airport.
you can always do R&D to see the possible scenarios,
Mhm.
and that's what research is all about. If you have scenarios where currently there are no flamingos, but you can have whether warm water and untreated sewage can actually the only driver for benthic
Exactly.
high benthos. So
Mhm.
I think you being so you are associated where, sir? Sorry.
No, I'm basically a geologist, so I'm not an
Okay.
environmentalist.
Okay.
But yeah, but I head the environment department here in Pune University.
Okay.
So
I think it
yeah,
will be a great idea,
yeah,
sir.
it'll be a great idea.
Yeah,
And we have the instrumentations to test water quality and other things.
absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
and many of my students are here, and
Okay.
we can extend this as part
Yeah.
of their OGT and research projects.
Yeah, we'll be happy. We
So
have an
if you all
advanced
are
research center in DSPO, and they
exactly.
have taken me on board very recently to help them establish this center. So
Correct.
we are certainly looking at encouraging students to take some very innovative ways, not just conventional ways, but the different line of thinking and finding the real reasons behind this whole mystery mysteries of this large density of birds.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you very
Thank
much. I mean, yeah, if
my
I
pleasure.
Thank you,
hand
Vimal
it
sir,
over to,
for
yeah,
this
madam. Yes.
discussion. We would also like to mention that Savitribai Phule Pune University Environment Science Department is a partner in organizing this webinar.
No, it is just because of the human connect. Okay. So with INTACH, Vartak sir is here. So we are
But
happy to
Pune
be
has
part of
got
it.
a very good active network of conservation groups and individuals.
Yes, sir.
For a
And
very
we
long
are
period of
also
time.
now having an MOU with the forest department.
Okay.
And we are running, we have started a course on environmental science, forest ranging.
Achha, forest
Because
ranger.
forest ranging. So they
Achha.
will have in the academic Chandrapur first year, and then
Very
second year
interesting.
the application things. So we are trying a novel sort of approach in the new education policy. So it's good
That's
to
great.
connect all these dots, and
Yeah, yeah.
I'm in the learning phase basically, because I'm not a
So all of us are
conservationist.
learning phase.
I'm a water
If you
conservationist.
talk about geology, I'll be in learning phase for me.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So thank you for a very nice talk and very nice things.
My pleasure.
Please, ma'am, over to you.
Thank you, sir. May I request Dr. Ajit Vartak to please do the vote of thanks? I'm sure there'll be more discussions to follow and many more questions too. And I hope we can stay connected with Dr. Deepak Apte to see if he can support us in future too. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I spent a week in DS Pune office here. So once a month, 1 week I'm here. So,
Thank you, sir. Dr. Vartak, please.
On behalf of INTACH Pune, Maharashtra Vruksha Samvardhini Pune, Vanarai, and Department of Environmental Sciences, Savitribai Phule Pune University, I would like to express our sincere thanks to Dr. Deepak Apte sir for sparing his valuable time to give his enlightening and thought-provoking inaugural talk on Central Asian Flyway and Wetlands. I also thank Mr. Sharad Phatak for his technical support. I also thank everyone in the audience for attending this inaugural talk of World Water 2025. Tomorrow at 6 p.m., we have second lecture in this World Water 2025 by Mr. Hemant Karkhanes, Associate Manager, Godrej Mangroves, Mumbai. He will talk on mangroves, distribution, adaptation, and biodiversity. All these lectures in this week will be from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. with same Zoom link, which is already provided. You can also join on our YouTube channel, Mission Devrai Live. All these lectures will be available on our YouTube channel also, that is Mission Devrai. With this, we conclude this evening inaugural session. Thank you once again. We'll meet again for second lecture tomorrow at 6 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
थँक्यू. छान झालं लेक्चर, मस्त.
फारच आपटेचं एकदम वंडर, फारच अप्रतिम, म्हणजे अगदी
हो,
विचार
खरंच.
करायला लावलं सगळ्यात. नाही सर, तुम्ही आता रेमंड सरांच्या बरोबर काहीतरी खरंच विद्यापीठात काहीतरी जॉईंटली ऍक्टिव्हिटी करायला हरकत नाही. पुण्यात तुमचं वाढवा पार्टिसिपेशन ऍक्टिव्हिटी